Good afternoon, everyone. Let me make myself the presenter here. And we will be getting started here in roughly 2 minutes. Maybe one. We'll see. Give you guys just enough time to go grab that next cup of coffee, bite to eat. Do what you got to do, man.
I'll monitor the questions.
Thanks, Francisco.
Absolutely.
Seeing that attendee number climb and climb.
Yep.
Give everybody another minute or so here.
So I'm moving one of my machines in VM.
Yeah.
Started this morning at 8:30. It's on 4%.
Is it on your SSD data store or is it on a hard drive store?
Yeah, it's in a hard drive. I'm moving to an SSD. I have a failure hard drive. I'm like, let me go ahead and do the other one as well because they're about the same age.
Yeah.
So
that's actually, you know what? I don't know if we had that as a topic for a webinar. That might be a good topic for a webinar.
Yeah, no kidding.
Deployment in VMware. Maybe we'll do that one next Friday. I could probably do that.
Yeah, not easy, man. It's been very slow to transfer all that data. It's not ACM, I mean, it's VM.
Yeah. All right, for everyone who is in attendance, we are going to get started here. We're 2 minutes after the top of the hour. Once again, we thank you as always for joining our Lunch and Learn webinar series here on a Friday, noon Pacific time. Today, we're going to be talking about Active Directory and everything that you can do with Active Directory and ACM. So quickly, just kind of go through the agenda here. We're going to talk a little bit about what Active Directory is, what the difference between Active Directory and LDAP, because those terms get kind of thrown around in the same conversation. We're going to talk about the different options available for Active Directory with ACM. We're going to go through some configuration on how to configure both remote authentication as well as LDAP collaboration to pull in identities. And then time permitting, we're going to go in and I'm actually going to show you guys how this all works in conjunction with our Vigilon Control Center client as well for the video management side. So what is Active Directory and what is LDAP, right? So this slide, and I'm not going to lie to you guys, I stole this from Wikipedia. But Active Directory is a directory service that was developed by Microsoft for Microsoft domain networks. Essentially, you have a domain controller or you've got a server that's got a database of information. Now that database utilizes LDAP, right? So the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol to store that information and allow you to manage and you know change things in that database. So the idea behind that is that LDAP is technically the database, whereas Active Directory is kind of the way to access that database when you're using a Microsoft, you know, Windows network, right, or a Microsoft domain. So with that, wanted to kind of touch on how ACM is configured. Okay, so ACM, the appliance that you as a customer or you as a partner that you're out there installing, has two separate databases. One database is Open LDAP, and that's what we use for configuration and identity management. So everything that we're going to be talking about today and doing today is going to be dealing directly with that Open LDAP database. Now, you don't need to know anything about Open LDAP. I don't need you guys to go out and research it. Just know that that is the database that we use for basically configuring the entire ACM system, and that's where we store identity information. We do have a separate database, which I did throw on the screen here, which is Postgres SQL, and we use that for all of our transactional information. The reason that is Postgres SQL manages things that make changes often much better than an open LDAP database, which is meant for storing information and holding that information and then being able to reserve it back up to another application. So Postgres SQL, we're not going to talk about that a whole lot today other than this slide. We're really going to focus on that open LDAP database and how ACM uses it in conjunction with the rest of our talk today. So with ACM, there's two different types of communication or collaboration with Active Directory. One of which is completely free and it comes with every single ACM appliance, whether that's a Pro appliance, an Enterprise, Enterprise Plus, or VM appliance. Basically, the system as a whole has the ability to connect to an Active Directory server to use that server's credentials for logging into ACM. So this is great for a customer who has operators, whether they're IT or HR or your security staff, they're users in Active Directory, and you want to have one single username and password for those people to be able to log into their computer, their email, ACM, ACC at that point, all of that working in conjunction with each other so that you have a single login. I'm going to refrain from using the word single sign-on because it's not true single sign-on. However, it's kind of single sign-on light, right? If I have my jared.swanson@motorolasolutions.com email, that's what I use to log into my computer. I can use that same email and password or that same username and password to log into ACM and concurrently ACC, which I'll show later in the presentation. This does utilize Active Directory as the primary source or the authoritative source for logging in, and it does work with on-premises versions of Active Directory. So if you're using AD in the cloud with Microsoft Azure, typically you still have some form of local connectivity to a local domain controller or a local server. So we will require that local connection to an on-site or on-premises server. And we do utilize certificate pinning. So this is how we trust the connection between ACM and that Active Directory server. So we're not just making calls in the clear to grab information from Active Directory and we're sending passwords over the network in clear text. It is using certificate pinning and it is still using our security protocols to encrypt that data. Okay, so this is a very crude kind of model of how this works. Basically, the operator needing to log into ACM says, hey, I'm going to log into ACM now. I'm going to use my Active Directory credentials. It sends that request over to ACM. ACM says, hey, Active Directory server, Jared Swanson's trying to log in using jared.swanson@avigilon.com or motorolasolutions.com. Is that okay? The Active Directory server says, yes, that's okay. And it sends that information back to the operator's workstation so that they can log in. Very simple process. Essentially, the only communications that are needed to be set up from an operator level are actually already done at the appliance and server level. So an operator does not need to know that they, have the, that there's this stuff kind of going on in the background. It's all happening there for them. Okay. So the other type of Active Directory communication that we have is our LDAP collaboration or our Active Directory collaboration. Now, this is a licensed feature, so it does not come with every access control manager system. It is something that you have to purchase with the system, and I do have the license there in the slide on the very bottom there. So if you see something that you'd like to do today, if you're an existing customer and you don't have Active Directory, I would encourage you to reach out to your partner and say, hey, I really want that. Can we talk about adding this feature to our system? But the important things about our Active Directory collaboration or LDAP collaboration is it is a pull only. That is the one thing that I do want to stress. When we create this collaboration between ACM and Active Directory, it is only pulling information from Active Directory. We are not going to make any changes to Active Directory from ACM. So you can be kind of rest assured that an operator who logs in using their Active Directory credentials and is going in and making changes to ACM is not going to affect the top level of Active Directory by the changes that they make. And we do that on purpose so that we can't affect, the greater, the greater good, as it were, in that Active Directory server. So this does give you an external source for identity management. We do see this used a lot in use cases for education and commercial applications, because one of the things, that makes this a really great tool is the fact that, most of the people that are on this call now are probably using some form of Active Directory to log into their computer, or they're using Active Directory to get their email. So that database is already there. Those people, the identities are already in a database somewhere. You can really use this as a tool to save a lot of time in your identity management, because you don't need to go in and manually enter people into your access control system. You don't need to use, a CSV import or anything like that. You can just connect ACM up to Active Directory and then pull that information down into ACM. So we do allow for multiple Active Directory collaborations. So if you're working with a single ACM appliance and the customer has multiple AD servers, we can create multiple Active Directory collaborations. Collaborations are scheduled to run, so we don't have a limit on when these can run. Basically, it's going to be configured so that you're going to run these collaborations in a best practices time frame, and I'm going to show you guys that a little bit more when I get into the demonstration. And then the last thing on here, identities created locally in ACM are not affected by the AD collaboration. And what that means is I still have the option to manually enter people into ACM. So if I'm using contract workers or temporary employees or people that I'm not planning on putting into my Active Directory system, I can still add them manually to ACM and they'll work and function just like any other identity. So there's no change in the functionality of a system if you use this Active Directory collaboration. Once again, kind of just going through the information that can be pulled in through the collaboration. So we get all identity information. So name, address, email, phone number, department, the status of the identity, whether it's active or inactive. We can bring in token information, the card numbers, embossed card numbers, the status of the tokens. We can bring in photos from Active Directory. If you are storing photos in Active Directory, we'll bring those in. If you have user-defined fields, so if there's fields in ACM that we don't have created ahead of time, you can create user-defined fields for things like driver's license number, hair color, eye color, any of that pertinent information that you need to get into your access control system from your Active Directory. And then the last thing is you can actually bring in permissions or roles from Active Directory as well. So we can pull in groups from AD into ACM and use those to automatically assign to identities. Next thing here, another crude slide on kind of showing you how this works. Essentially, ACM is going to go out to Active Directory and it's going to use a secure connection to ask Active Directory for information, and then AD is just going to send that information back to ACM on a schedule. Now, when we run this collaboration, we are writing to that open LDAP database, as I mentioned before, and that's why we have multiple databases. So we're using the Active Directory collaboration to essentially take the information from the AD server and then write it to our internal database. So if you kind of think about the ecosystem of an ACM system, you don't need any external sources to make an ACM system work. This is in addition to the internal database with ACM. So now we're not requiring you to have some sort of external Active Directory or external SQL source or anything like that to pull in data into ACM because we have that open LDAP database built in. However, we have these collaborations, Active Directory being one of them, to grab that information and pull it into ACM to make your job a little bit easier. Now, before I move on, I'm going to go ahead and throw up a poll here. I want to see you guys, see what you guys are doing out there in the field. So quick poll. One thing, guys, if you are maximized on your screen, just go ahead and hit the escape key or unmaximize, and you can please answer the poll question there. Also, if you have any questions about what's what I'm talking about today, please put that in the question section. I do have my my wonderful colleague Francisco Oteros helping me out answer questions, and we'll either try to get them as they come in. We'll save some time towards the end to go through them as well. Good answers there. I like it. Just in a couple more seconds here. Perfect. Thank you, guys. Back to the presentation here. So let's talk about some of the best practices, okay? Because there's some very important stuff here. So we talked about the collaborations being able to run on a schedule. And I'm going to show you something when I get into the system, and you can technically run this collaboration in seconds or minutes. Now, we say use this collaboration running in a realistic expectation. If you have an Active Directory that has 10,000 identities in it, that collaboration may take 15, 20, 30 minutes to actually run the entire collaboration right to the database, start the connection, do all that, and then end the connection. It may take some time. So you don't want to run this collaboration so often that it doesn't give the system enough time to actually start, run the collaboration, finish, and close the session before you run it again. When we see people run collaborations too quickly or on top of each other, we start to get what's called transaction backlog, where the system basically says, hey, I can't handle that information right now. I'm gonna queue it up. And then you start queuing and queuing and queuing to a point where the system can't manage that data. So what we do is we say, hey, use it with a realistic expectation. If you have 1,000 people or 10,000 people, whatever it is, and it takes 30 minutes to run that collaboration, well, then you have no reason to run that collaboration every 15 minutes. It would be more of an expectation to run that every hour or maybe every 2 hours. You have to remember, with Active Directory, you're typically, unless you're a hospital system or something like that, where you're making changes really, really frequently and often, you're probably not making changes to Active Directory so often that you need this to be real time or near real time. Every hour, every 2 hours, every 6 hours, something like that will work, just fine. So one of the things, and you'll see this when I go into the demonstration, with our Active Directory collaboration, we use the field in the identity called the external system ID. Now, if you build an identity in ACM with directly in ACM, typically you're not filling out that field. You're not adding some sort of unique identifier. Now, we require a unique identifier when doing a collaboration, because when the collaboration runs, we look to that unique identifier to see, hey, were there any changes, or is that a new unique identifier? If there's changes and the unique identifier matches, then we're just going to update the identity in ACM. If there's a new unique identifier, then we're going to create a new identity in ACM. So you have to be very careful, and I'm going to give you kind of a tip and trick on some of the things that you can use. But you do need to have a unique identifier set for your identities in Active Directory so that we don't duplicate information in ACM. It is always the best practice work with your end users IT to make sure that this goes well. I'm going to talk about Active Directory as kind of a, in a very generalized fashion. So I'm not going to go into, every other, every type of Active Directory solution out there, which there's really not a whole lot of different types. However, your customers, Active Directory might be different than what I'm going to show you guys today. So it is always a best practice. Talk to IT, work with them to make sure that we're setting this up correctly. The fourth one there, backup or snapshot your system before running your first collaboration. If you're running a VM system, snapshot is a perfect option. Taking a backup is another option. Really, that is for an oops situation, right? If you end up running the collaboration and it pulls in the wrong information, it's a lot easier to just restore from a backup or restore from a snapshot than it is to delete and run it again. So it's just a best practice there. Now for the remote authentication, there is some certificate pinning. You'll see in my system, I actually didn't do the certificate pinning because I'm working here in a demonstration environment. For production environments, we do recommend that you use certificates so that you pin the certificate between ACM and your Active Directory server. If you do have any challenges with your certificates or certificate pinning, please contact technical support and they can work through that with you. Okay, so another poll real quick while I'm kind of getting things set up. All right, we'll give this a couple more seconds here. Perfect. All right, guys, appreciate the answers there. And we're going to jump right into ACM. We're going to talk about a remote authentication. Okay, so remote authentication is found underneath the system settings tab in the setup and settings of ACM. So when you hit system settings, it'll take you to here, and you've got two tabs for remote authentication. The first tab that you're going to set up is your remote authentication, your external domain. So this is what's telling ACM where the external domain controller is. My external domain is swansonhome.local. Yours would be whatever the customer's domain is, and this is the domain qualifier. So I'm using a .local. This might be a .com, might be a .ca, might be .local or LCL, depends on what your customer is using. And then you can create a link between this external domain, and then you're going to use the domain controller's IP address or host name if DNS is set up properly to create this external domain connection. Once you have the external domain created, you now can select your default domain for remote authentication and the server IP address. Now, in large domain controllers, you may have multiple domain controllers with one primary and a couple secondaries. This default server is going to go to the primary in that case. You can create multiple domains. So if you have a customer that's got a .local, a .com, they've got different domain controllers, you can certainly create multiple external domains and multiple remote authentications. When you have that and you go into an identity, you now can go and tell an identity how it's going to access ACM. So by default, an identity, normally we would just go in here and we would add some sort of login information, right? Jay Swanson, or first name, last name, give it a password. That's how we would set up a local account to log into ACM. But I want to connect to a remote ACM. So I'm going to hit remote authentication. I'm going to come down here to my remote domain, and then I'm going to put in the user Jay Swanson at swansonhome.local. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and copy this field to the second. Okay, don't need this allow remote access. It's just these two right here. We're going to click save. And now if I want to log into this system, I can log in using my domain account, as long as everything went well. And it did, okay? So what I just did there is I set this, this identity to now authenticate against Active Directory. And this Active Directory said, hey, that is a valid user in Active Directory. It is also a valid user in ACM. Go ahead and log in. And I'm now logged in as that user, okay? The next part of this, guys, is our collaboration. Okay, so the collaboration is where we talked about, where we're pulling information into ACM. So I'm going to bring up my Active Directory server. Please, no one on the call laugh. Yes, this is a Windows Server 2008 box, just the only one I had available to me. And I'm going to look at a couple things here. Okay, so I have both users and groups in my Active Directory. So here's my top level domain, swansonhome.local. I've placed users in an OU inside of my Active Directory, and then I've also got a couple groups. Okay, so I'm going to use these groups to create roles associated to a specific identity. Okay, so I went ahead and created a couple security groups. These don't have to have any permissions whatsoever. They just need to be created as a group. All we're doing is using the group name to associate to a role. So if you think about your Active Directory, you know, when you create an identity in Active Directory, for the IT guys on the call, you know, you create an identity in Active Directory, you associate, you know, printer groups, you associate, you know, what type of security, security protocols they're going to have. And then you can also assign other security groups to them. And these would be mapped to the roles in ACM or the permissions in ACM. So I'm going to come in here to my exterior doors group, and I'm going to go ahead and add Mr. Mikens. Oops. To check names. Come on. Let's go William. All right, so we're going to add Mr. Mikens to this group, and let's go ahead and add him to this group as well. Okay. So now Mr. Mikens has been added to those two groups, and we can see he is a part of those groups here in Active Directory as well. So in a user, what we're going to do is we're going to map fields from this attribute editor to fields in ACM. So there's a couple things that we'll need in here, or we can use from the attribute editor so that we can see what we need to do in ACM. So you can see his common name is William Mikens. His full qualified distinguished name, which is different than that, is set here. You've got his employee ID number. We've got all kinds of things in here. So I'm going to kind of leave this how it is right now, and I'm going to show you what the collaboration looks like. Okay. So if we come over here to collaborations, when you add a collaboration by default, go back. I don't think it liked me logging out of my my other account there, guys. Sorry about that. Go in our collaborations. So when you go to add a collaboration, in your drop down here, you're going to have the collaborations that you're licensed for. You can see here I'm licensed for more than just Active Directory. This is that Active Directory, we call it LDAP pull. I'm also licensed for SQL, Oracle, and generic XML. Okay, so you're going to pick the collaboration that matches what you're doing. I'm going to show you guys the one that I already have created here and kind of go through it. So the first part of your collaboration is, where is your Active Directory server? So this is the IP address of my server. I'm just using the standard port 389. If your customer is using SSL, this is going to be a different port. It's a configurable port. You can validate the certificate based on the SSL requirements. Once again, for something like that, we encourage you guys to talk to tech support because you may need to add a certificate to the appliance. This bind DN is the distinguished name that I'm going to use to log into my Active Directory. So you can see here, I'm using the administrator account, which is located in the users group inside of this domain, okay? And then I've got my password. Once I have that first part done, I would hit save, and I can come in here and I can schedule this collaboration to run as often as I need it to. Now, my system here, I only have 10, 15 people in Active Directory, so it's a very simple, very, quick load of that information. I probably have the option of setting something like 30 minutes, okay? That would be kind of the bare minimum that I would set for something like this. Once again, for your application, you're gonna wanna set this based on your requirements. If it's a lot of identities, don't set it every 30 minutes, don't set it every 5 minutes, set it based on hours, okay? And then you've got a start and an ending date. So I would come in here and I'd say, hey, I'm gonna start this as of today, and I'm gonna end it, as of next year or whenever you wanna end it, okay? So we save that. And then we're gonna start mapping information. Now, this is where the collaboration sometimes, in a lot of cases, does require the assistance of a customer's IT department, because we use filtering to grab the information that we want. So if you look at my Active Directory right now, I'm looking at the entire distinguished name for the entire domain controller. And I'm looking now in the users group. Okay, so I'm going to my domain controller and I'm looking within the users group. Inside of that group, using this filter, I am only going to filter for these users or person. Okay, depending on your Active Directory, this might be user, this might be person. Either one, as far as I'm aware, they're interchangeable. Okay. Now, if I needed additional filtering, I could do that. I could put in, object class person, but I only want object class person from a specific type of person. So I can add filters to this by open parentheses and close a parentheses there, close a parenthesis, open, object class equals group, right? So I can add additional filters to my queries so that I'm narrowing down my search, okay? For mine, I have everything all in that one location, so I'm just gonna go with object class person for now, okay? So down here at the bottom, this is where we're going to map the information from Active Directory into ACM. So the fields that are in bold, that are uneditable, are the fields in ACM. So identity unique, this is that unique identifier, and I'll give you that tip and trick here in a second. This is the unique identifier that we're looking for from Active Directory, so that we can update based on this information. Now I'm using object GUID or object GUID, however you want to pronounce it. And what object GUID is, it is a randomly generated number within Active Directory. So every single time you create an identity in AD, it uses object GUID to create a random, generated number. It's a 26 character, it can be more than that, but it's a 26 to 36 number character number that is always going to be unique. You will never have them, repeat. So this is something that's really easy to use for identifying this person. Now, if object GUID is not something that you can use for whatever reason, maybe you're tying this to another system that's using that field and you can't have it match, essentially any attribute in Active Directory can be used. So for your installation, maybe you want to use employee ID. If the employee ID is always going to be a randomly generated or a unique number, then go ahead and use employee ID and you would just change this. The rest of these you'll notice here, these are all of the fields that match the attributes here in Active Directory. So first name, last name, so SN is surname, given name is first name, middle initials, title, all of that information. But there's a couple things that are really important in here. One of them being status. So I'm actually using user account control as the status for this identity. What I want is when I bring this identity into ACM, I want it to either be active or inactive based on the account in Active Directory. So this allows me to use Active Directory to activate and inactivate identities. So if I make a change in Active Directory to deactivate someone, then they're going to be deactivated on my next collaboration run in ACM. Roles, I'm going to use the member of, and this is going to look to those groups, and any of those groups that match, it's going to add it to this identity. I can use the when changed switch here, which will look to Active Directory only for changes in identities. It's not going to look for everything. And here we can use login name and some other information so that we can set the remote user to now use Active Directory as their remote source for logging in. So just like we did before, we can go in here and we can set this. So I'm going to go find, I just want to kind of show you guys where it's at. So I'm going to find SAM account name, because I know that SAM account name is the account that this person would use to log into ACM. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to put that in the login name field. SAM, I want to make sure I type this correctly. SAM account name. SAM account name. Okay. And we're going to save that. So once again, this is all dependent on what information you want to bring over for your customer. Okay. Now we can, as I mentioned before, we can bring in token information. This is typically not something that customers store in their Active Directory. So this is one of those times where you may have to do a little bit of going back and forth between either ACM and Active Directory, or if you're doing a conversion from another competitor system to ACM, you may need to take that card information and then put it into Active Directory so that we get this token information if you want to use it. Now, one thing I'll mention, guys, when we see Active Directory collaboration used, the majority of the time, the only thing that people are doing is using this identities tab, because that's the base of the information. We want that information coming in from Active Directory. The second most commonly used would be identities and tokens, and bringing that token information in from Active Directory, because like I mentioned, a lot of this stuff is not typically in AD. But the information here, so I'm looking at my employee number as being my internal card number. So I'm going to go back over to AD, and we're going to look for that employee number right here. I'm going to edit this field, and I'm going to throw in the card number, right? So this is the card that I pulled out of the box. This is the value for that card. I'm going to throw it into the employee number. We'll go ahead and apply that, and now I'll get that token information. Once again, you can use status, you can use the user account control to manage the status of the individual tokens as well. So if I wanted to just, maybe I didn't use user account control for the identity, but I did use it for the token. I can deactivate a token, but not deactivate the entire identity. Blob, this is photos. 99% of you out there, if you have Active Directory, you're probably not using photos in your Active Directory. You're storing that locally. However, if you are doing photos, you can bring photos in from Active Directory as well. I did notice I need to change something here real quick. Get rid of that. The next thing is those user defined fields. I'm currently not set up to bring in any additional information into ACM. However, if this information was in my Active Directory, I can pull those in from those attributes. And then the last thing is roles. Okay, so this is my permissions. Now you'll see here, my filter is a little bit different than it was for all of the other tabs, because I'm still looking in the users group. However, I'm not looking for users anymore. I'm looking for a specific set of groups that I have created that are going to be my permissions groups. So my filter is object class equals group, and the common name is going to be p-building6 with a wildcard, because I didn't feel like typing in all this information. But here's the two groups that we saw before that I created in my Active Directory. Okay. So now that I have this all set up, and by the way, one thing that you can do is you can actually also create an associated access group when you're using roles. Typically, the workflow for this goes, if you're going to be using roles to assign to identities and you want to pull in roles into ACM, you're going to do a role collaboration first to pull that information into ACM. Then you can run the collaboration again once you've set up the other tabs to pull in the additional information for the identities and match it up. Because remember, we're matching it up using this unique identifier. As long as this is a unique identifier, everything is just going to update and we're not going to create anything new or crazy. Okay. So I can come back out to my collaboration and you'll see here that I have a couple options. Hopefully you can see here. I have a couple options here on the base tab. So I have the ability to install this, and when I install this, it would start running based on the schedule that I set. I'm going to go ahead and install it. I also have the ability to preview this ahead of time. Now, when I do a preview, this is going to give me the top 10 collaboration, the information from the top 10 collaboration. So you're going to get, a little bit of information about, hey, is this going to run properly? And I can look through here and I can see either I have a bad search filter or I have a good search filter. Everything looks right. So I have the ability to go through and make sure that this stuff is correct in my system. Okay. So I noticed here, hey, I have a bad search filter on something. So let's go back into my collaboration and I'm going to get rid of my when changed. Okay. For the purposes of this demonstration, I don't need it. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. So now, if I know that I've done everything right, I've previewed the system, I've backed up my system, I've taken a snapshot, I am ready to go. I can run this collaboration. And when I run this collaboration, it's going to cycle through and it's going to tell me what has been added, what has not been added. It's a very simple, but it's going to give me information here. So the first thing that it ran was roles, and we added 2 new roles to my system. Okay. The next thing that it did is it processed all 8 of the identities in my system and it added 1 new one. I will guarantee you I know who that is. It ran through the rest of this stuff and it said, hey, there was nothing else to change. So everything is good. Okay. Now, one little pro tip I want to give you guys is when you run a collaboration like this, it's going to log that information on top of the last one. So you guys saw there when I ran the collaboration, I kind of had to scroll down on the page a little bit. One of the things you guys can do is go into the logs here and just delete this identity collab log. And then now you'll start with fresh and you'll get the information right there as it's running. Okay. So let's look at the roles. It said that we pulled in 2 roles and here they are. P-building6 exterior, P-building6 interior. If I look at one of these roles, I did not create an access group to associate with these. So I would still need to go in and create an access group and assign it to this role so these people would have access to the doors. I can certainly do that ahead of time if I wanted to. But if I look at the access tab, you can see Mr. William Mikens was assigned to this role. If we go over to his identity, here's Mr. William, first name, last name. Here's that object GUID, the external system ID that we talked about. We got his remote authentication is set to the remote domain, and he's going to be using this login against the domain controller. And if we look at the roles, he's now got access to these 2 things. Now, we can also look at his token, and unfortunately, it looks like that was a bad field that I put in there, but normally the token number would have come over as well, okay? So you've got the ability now to use Active Directory to populate your system with a lot of great data without having to do it manually. Now, as I mentioned before, typically Active Directory, the collaboration is used to just pull in identity information, and then we look at a manual entry for roles or tokens or something like that. So I still have the ability to come in here and say, hey, Bill is also going to be a logical operator on my system, so I'm going to put him in my logical role. And yeah, my token messed up and it didn't pull in from Active Directory, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to assign a token to him, okay? So now all of that is set. The photo didn't pull over because I didn't have a photo for Bill in my Active Directory. Otherwise, I would have got that information as well. So all of that information came in from Active Directory, okay? So the next thing I wanted to show you guys was, well, how does that associate with ACC? And real quick, before I do that, I'm gonna throw out one last poll. Give you guys a second to answer that and give myself a second to take a quick sip of water. So there is a really good reason that this poll question is active. Currently, I haven't talked about this yet. Currently, you cannot delete information out of ACM from an Active Directory collaboration. So if I delete a user in Active Directory, it will not delete them from ACM. The method that we prefer or we suggest you guys use in that case, and I'll go ahead and show you here. Give you 5 more seconds on the poll. The method that we prefer you guys using for that is going into the identity first in, and that's why you guys will notice there, that's why the token didn't go in, because I didn't activate it, or I didn't apply it. The method that we prefer for deactivating people in in ACM is to disable the account first. Okay, so now I've disabled Bill or William. He loves when I call him William. And if I run this collaboration again, and you'll see because I wiped out the log, it just presented me with the information. And now if I go back into William, you'll see that he is now inactive. If I delete him now out of Active Directory, he will remain in ACM. However, he will remain in ACM deactivated or inactive. So his identity is inactive, and hopefully this did it too. The token was inactivated as well because I'm using that user account control. So everything about Bill in ACM is now deactivated. It's based on your customer policy. Basically, if the customer wants to delete people out of both AD and ACM, you're going to have to do it manually. However, it is a recommendation of ours that you actually don't delete people out of ACM, because at this point, this token is not going to work. Bill cannot come back to my building and try to, use his card to get in. And if he does, I'm going to get some sort of notification that a deactivated card was used, okay? So let's pull up ACC real quick, and I wanted to show you how this kind of all works together. So on a previous webinar, we talked about a unification and using ACM as that authoritative source for ACC to pull in identity information or operator information into ACC. This takes it one step further. We now have Active Directory as our top level. That's our source for everything. So we've pulled that information into ACC or into ACM. So now what I can do is I can create a link between an ACC group and that role that I just pulled in for Bill. And now you'll see, never works when you want it to. Believe I need to disconnect and reconnect, and hopefully this comes through. Apologies, guys. Oops, that would be. Got the IP address of my own server. Trust. Hopefully. I got my B micins in there. I didn't get my W micins. So this pulled in some additional identities from the collaboration. And the unification does run on a schedule as well. So it is possible that I need to wait until my my ACC communications is reestablished so that it can pull in that information. However, when I make changes in my top level, I actually do know why it didn't work. Because Bill was disabled. Try this one more time, guys. Thank you for your patience. There's my building 6. Gotta run my collaboration again. Run, yes. Okay, and we updated Bill. Bill should now be active. And go ahead and delete that again and add it back. There he is. Okay, so good pro tip there. We're not going to be able to bring in inactive operators from ACM into ACC. So that's a good thing. So right now, Bill is active in my system and he has all of the permissions that he would normally have, and he can log in and do whatever he needs to do. If I go in and I actually deactivate him here, disable his account, then I run my collaboration again. At that point, he would no longer be able to log into ACM and concurrently would not be able to log into active or into ACC. Okay. So with 8 or so minutes left, let's go through some of the questions here. Francisco, Rob, looks like you guys have answered a bunch of them. Anything I need to look at?
Yeah. So one thing here that that we want to make sure people understand what you just finished showing, right? When you reactivate an account in ACM, right, that account goes back to active. By design in ACM, the credential will remain inactive. So you have to go back to the credential, right? So if you pull up Bill now, well, he's inactive now, but if you, and you go in a token, you will see that the token is, so he's gonna go ahead and reactivate that and run a collaboration. But you see that by design, but as a security feature that we put in there, if you will, it's that credential. So he's gonna refresh that. So right there is active, right? Now if you go to token, the token remains inactive. So you have to go there manually and reactivate that. Okay.
Yep.
So that's one thing.
Thanks,
one more that I was asking here in the chat. I think the answers are going, but one important thing in relation to the object GUI that you just showed that as the unique identifier, it is a good idea to use anything else other than that, and I'll explain. If you have a employee number, for example, employee ID, use that and don't use object GUI. So object GUI is exclusive from Active Directory and cannot be used in anywhere else. So if you, for example, in your Active Directory, you have a ID, a unique ID or an employee ID, use that instead of the object GUI, just because you could later on decide that, hey, I want to add also this SQL collaboration where I'm going to bring photos of those identities because that's where I store the photos and other information. If you're using the same unique identifier, no problem. You can plug other data sources. Okay, so we've come across a lot of that where they'll go use some sort of unique identifier that's basically this is the object GUI, then you have to go back and massage the whole data to change that, and then be able to synchronize everything again.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so kind of a best practice there, guys. If it's a one-to-one relationship, you're never going to add anything else, like Francisco mentioned, a SQL collaboration or an even higher top level collaboration, like with a student information system or something like that, where it can't grab the object GUID, or as Francisco mentioned, I've got to take all of those object GUIDs and move them up into that other system. Then using any unique identifier other than object GUID is a good best practice. Employee ID is a great one to use. Just the thing to kind of drive home with that is just make sure that it is unique, okay? Because a lot of times if you're not using unique identifier, we have seen cases where someone will use something that they've reassigned to someone later down the road, and now we either get a duplicate or we get the wrong information updating in ACM. So just make sure that you're following the best practices there. But I thank you, Francisco, for that.
Yep. So here's a question for you there. Bill is asking, is there a best practice on labeling rows, groups, and devices?
So it follows along with the same ACM best practices. So the best practices that we recommend, and you'll notice this here in my system, is for anything that's logical access to the system. So if I'm an operator and I'm making changes in ACM, identify that somehow, right? I use an L for logical. If you want to use O for operator or A for administrator, that's fine. Whatever you want to do. I'm saying that anyone who has an L-based role is an operator. I then also use a P for physical. I've seen people use D for door, whatever you want to use, but essentially separating those and then using those as the groups in Active Directory. And because my system was already kind of set up, it's a little bit difficult to show. However, one thing, as I kind of mentioned when I was going through it, is if you're going to be doing an Active Directory collaboration with a customer, right, for the partners that are on, or even customers that you're setting up your system right now, use the groups in Active Directory to create your roles and potentially even your access groups ahead of time. So you go through your naming convention, you know that you're going to have building 1, building 2, building 3, interior doors, exterior doors, gates, whatever they are. You're still going to go through that same planning process, but instead of creating them here first in ACM, you're going to create them as groups in your Active Directory. And then when you run that collaboration, the collaboration will not, for the first run, would not have identity information, token, blob, or user defined. None of this stuff would be filled out for that. You would just have roles. You can even go in and create a completely separate collaboration just for roles. So then I'm going to reach out to Active Directory and go, hey, give me my permissions, give me my roles. And then it's going to fill out this entire thing for you. And then at that point, all you're doing is going in to your access groups, making sure that they have the correct doors in them, and then run a collaboration again with the identity information, and then it all matches together. So I know that sounds like a couple extra steps, but you now have all of that data in Active Directory, so you can use that to update it later. So if I make a change to one of the roles in my Active Directory, so if I change this name, I can then affect the name in in ACM as well. Okay. Craig, how do I know if I have licensing for this? If you are on an ACM6 system, you'll go into the About screen under Appliance, and you should see one of these. Okay. ACM6 License Collab LDAP. If you're still in ACM5, it's a similarly labeled license. I believe it's just ACM6 LDAP collaboration. Is it possible to tie the token status to the user account if the token was not pulled in from AD? Yes. Yes, because that field will be updated based on the collaboration, right? So if I didn't have the token set in Active Directory, right? If I didn't have this in Active Directory, but I had token status set to user account control, it would still make the change, okay? However, if you're using the token portion of the collaboration, it is always a best practice to put the tokens into Active Directory, because Active Directory is going to overwrite information if the unique identifier matches. Okay, so if I don't have the token here in ACM, or vice versa, right? If I had the token in ACM but I didn't have the token here in Active Directory, when I run the collaboration again and I had token enabled, it's going to wipe out that token number. So you want to, be careful with that. Okay. We are at the top of the hour. I went right to the limit here, 1 minute over. If there's no other questions, go ahead and end this session for today. I'll give it another minute here just in case anybody wants to chime in. Francisco, we've got Monday. What you got on deck?
All right, so Monday will be noon Eastern time. We're going to talk about some of the more deep configurations in ACM. So we'll be talking about groups, profiles, policies, and now I'm just gonna go ahead and add also templates because they all kind of work together. So we're gonna show you how you can go and do mass updates. Say I have this group of people and I want to give them now access to another area, or I want to remove access, or so all those things we'll show that in the next section on Monday. So again, Monday noontime, Eastern noontime. Okay, that's it.
Foster, you got no. Rob, can you? Oh, you're
Yep.
no microphone from Rob. Oh, you there?
Oh yeah, I'm here. I'm dialed in.
Oh, there you go. What do we have on deck for Wednesday?
So Wednesday we're going to cover interlocks. So should be an exciting session at noon Central Time.
All
Sure
right.
you guys join.
Next Friday, it's now a toss-up because Francisco and I had a good topic this morning. We're either going to be doing Verdi biometrics or we're going to be doing VMware deployment and VMware care, right? Best practices using ACM inside of VMware. So stay tuned. We'll know probably by Monday which one we're going to do. But we thank you all for your time today. Thank you once again for letting us go a couple minutes over. Recording will be available here shortly after the presentation, and I got people voting for biometrics.
You got already
so we'll
voting on Verdi.
Oh, no, my next Friday is not going to be canceled. I know, Bill. So we'll still do it. We'll still do a webinar next Friday. I know we're all supposed to be off, but you know what? I think these are important. We'll get it done. So thank you once again, everybody, for being on today, and look forward to seeing you guys next week. Have a good one, everyone.